Mafia boss never imagined his black Maid saved his daughter with the greatest proof of love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. It was an ordinary morning at the sprawling mansion of Mafia boss Dominic Valentino. The sun was barely peeking through the large windows, casting a soft glow over the polished floors of the mansion's entrance. But inside one of the rooms, chaos was unfolding. Little Emma, Dominic's daughter, had been ill for days. Her fever was spiking, and despite the best efforts of the house's personal doctor, nothing seemed to ease her discomfort. The sound of her cries echoed through the mansion, making it impossible for anyone to ignore. Dominic, usually composed and in control, paced the hallways with a look of helpless frustration. His daughter, the one thing he cherished above all else, was suffering, and he could do nothing to stop it. He had every luxury at his disposal: doctors, medicine, wealth, but none of it mattered when it came to the health of his child. The doctors had suggested a specialized treatment, but it was still days away from arriving. His anxiety was palpable, his heart pounding with each passing second. Inside the room, Emma's cries grew louder. In the corner, her nanny, a woman named Jasmine, stood quietly. She had always been a constant in the Valentino household, working tirelessly to care for the children. But today, she was overcome with a feeling she couldn't ignore. She had lost her own child many years ago, and knew all too well what it felt like to watch a child suffer. It was unbearable, and she couldn't stand to see little Emma in such pain. Against the rules of the mansion, Jasmine made a decision. She couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Without another thought, she hurried into the room where Emma lay, still crying, tossing and turning in her bed. The doctors had instructed her to stay away, but in that moment, Jasmine's maternal instincts took over. She gently picked up Emma, cradling her in her arms, and whispered soothing words to calm her. She knew the child needed comfort and tenderness. Her body still produced milk, a painful reminder of her lost daughter, and Jasmine realized that perhaps she could offer Emma the comfort she needed. She carefully adjusted Emma in her arms and began to nurse her, despite the rules she had sworn to follow. Jasmine felt a deep connection, not only because she was providing comfort, but also because, in that moment, she could offer the one thing she knew could calm Emma's crying. As Emma began to settle into a peaceful silence, Jasmine looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. He had heard the sound of his daughter's cries cease and had come to check. What he saw before him was a sight he never expected: his maid, a woman of humble background, nursing his daughter. His first instinct was to reprimand her, to tell her she had overstepped her bounds. But when he looked down at his daughter, her feverish cheeks now cool, her breathing steady, and her tiny body relaxed in Jasmine's arms, something inside him shifted. He had never imagined that this woman, whom he had once only seen as an employee, would be the one to save his daughter. His heart ached, not just with gratitude, but with a realization that he had never fully understood the strength of the people around him. For a moment, he was speechless. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Thank you." It was the first time he had ever addressed her directly in a tone that wasn't commanding. Jasmine, still holding Emma in her arms, looked up, startled. She had never expected him to show any kind of gratitude. "I had no other choice, sir," she replied softly. She needed comfort. She needed love. Dominic stood frozen, processing what had just happened. His mind raced. Here was a woman he had barely noticed before, someone whose job it was to care for his family, and yet she had given his daughter the greatest gift of all, a mother's love, when he had none to give. It was a moment that would change everything for both of them. The silence in the room felt heavy as Dominic stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes locked on Jasmine as she gently cradled his daughter, Emma, in her arms. He could hardly believe what he was witnessing. His daughter, who had been crying nonstop for hours, was finally calm, her tiny body relaxed and peaceful in the woman's arms. Jasmine, the woman who had worked for him for years, had done something he never expected. She had given his daughter the comfort only a mother could provide. He had seen her as just a maid, someone who was there to care for his household, but never someone who could impact his family in such a profound way. His heart clenched, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something other than the cold, calculated control that defined his life. He took a hesitant step into the room, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." Jasmine looked up, her eyes wide with surprise, but she simply nodded, her gaze softening. She needed comfort. She replied quietly, her voice filled with the gentle compassion he had never expected from her. Dominic was at a loss for words. He had always prided himself on being a man of power and control, but in that moment, he realized how helpless he had truly been. His wealth, his status, none of it had mattered when his daughter was suffering. Jasmine, a woman he had barely noticed, had given Emma the love and comfort he was too numb to provide. The realization hit him hard, like a punch to the gut. He had built an empire, ruled over countless people with fear, but it was a simple act of kindness that had brought his daughter back from the edge. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching as Jasmine continued to soothe Emma. He felt a strange warmth wash over him, something he hadn't experienced in years. It was vulnerability, something he had buried deep within himself. For the first time, he saw Jasmine for who she truly was, not just a maid, but a woman with a heart full of compassion, someone who could heal the brokenness in his family when he couldn't. After a long pause, he finally spoke again. "You saved her." Jasmine's eyes met his, and for the first time, she didn't look away. "I just did what any mother would do," she said softly, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. Dominic swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He had never felt so conflicted in his life. He had always been a man who ruled with power and intimidation, but now, he realized how fragile that power truly was. In the presence of real love and sacrifice, it seemed meaningless. He couldn't deny the emotions swirling inside him. He needed to make things right. He walked closer to Jasmine and Emma, his movements deliberate. He knelt beside her, his eyes never leaving the two of them. The bond between Jasmine and Emma was undeniable. It was a bond he had never understood until now. He had never truly known what it meant to care for someone with that kind of devotion. "You're not just a maid," he said, his voice low and full of conviction. Jasmine didn't respond. She simply continued to hold Emma, her fingers gently brushing through the child's hair. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft rhythm of Emma's breathing. Dominic's gaze softened, and he made a decision. "From now on, you're part of this family. I'm not going to let anyone treat you as just an employee anymore." The words came out before he could stop them. It was as if the walls he had built around his heart had finally crumbled, and in that moment, he saw the truth. Jasmine was not just someone who worked for him. She was a part of his life, a part of his family. He had been blind to that for far too long. Jasmine's eyes flickered with surprise, but she said nothing. She simply nodded, as though she didn't quite know how to respond. Dominic looked down at Emma, still nestled in Jasmine's arms, her tiny hands curled into a peaceful rest. He reached out, gently touching the child's forehead, feeling the coolness of her skin. The fever was gone, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel a sense of relief. "Thank you," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know what I would do without you." Jasmine's gaze softened as she looked at him, and for a brief moment, the tension between them faded. She had always been the silent, unseen figure in the background, but now, Dominic realized how much she had done for his family. In that moment, something shifted. The powerful Mafia boss, the man who had ruled over his empire with an iron fist, had found something he had been missing all along: humanity. And it was through Jasmine's kindness that he had found it. He stood up, his mind made up. "You'll stay here. No more working in the shadows. You deserve better than that." Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But she found none. For the first time, she felt seen. Not as an employee, but as a person, as a mother. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As Dominic turned to leave, he paused at the door. "We'll talk more about this later," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "But for now, I need to make sure she's okay." With that, he left the room, and Jasmine was left alone with Emma, a quiet sense of hope stirring within her. She had always believed in the power of love and sacrifice, but now, she realized, there was something more. The Mafia boss may have ruled over an empire, but he had no power over the love and compassion she had shown to his daughter. And in that moment, she knew that she had made a difference, not just in Emma's life, but in Dominic's as well. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino had never imagined that his life would change because of a simple act of kindness, especially not one coming from someone like Jasmine. For years, he had seen her as just a maid, someone who worked in the background, taking care of the household while he focused on the empire he had built. But as he watched her care for his daughter, Emma, something in him shifted. He had always prided himself on controlling everything in his world, but in that moment, he realized he had no control over what mattered most, his family's well-being. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Dominic stood by the door, still grappling with the weight of his emotions. He had just walked away from a situation that should have been terrifying for anyone else. His daughter, his precious little girl, saved by a woman he had dismissed for so long. Jasmine had done what he could not. She had given Emma something he could never have, a mother's love. It was a truth that gnawed at him, and as he walked away from the room, he found himself questioning everything. He had always believed power was everything. Money, status, and control over people were what mattered. But in that room, as he saw Jasmine cradling Emma, the love she offered his daughter broke through the walls he had built around his heart. The decision to protect Jasmine was not an easy one. It wasn't just about the respect he felt for her now. It was about something deeper. He didn't want to admit it, but he needed her. He had always surrounded himself with people who obeyed him, but Jasmine had done something that changed everything. She had saved his daughter, and in doing so, she had forced him to confront a side of himself he had long buried. He could no longer see her as just the help. She was family. The realization hit him hard, and with it, a wave of guilt washed over him. How many times had he overlooked the people who truly cared for him? He had treated them like tools to further his goals, never understanding their sacrifices. Now he understood. That night, as Dominic lay awake in his bed, his mind kept returning to Jasmine and Emma. He thought about his own mother, who had been a strong and loving woman, but who had also been too busy with his father's empire to show him the love he needed. His father, too, had been a distant figure, more concerned with power than with his family. Maybe that was why Dominic had grown into the man he was, someone who valued control over compassion. But now, he couldn't escape the fact that love was what truly made the world go round. The next morning, Dominic called for a meeting with his most trusted advisors. As they sat around the grand table in his study, he looked at each one of them, his expression cold and calculated as always. But deep inside, something had changed. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady. "There are things I've overlooked for far too long." His advisors exchanged confused glances, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Dominic continued, "Jasmine has been an integral part of this household for years, but I've never truly appreciated what she does for this family." He paused, letting his words sink in. "From now on, she will not be treated as just a maid. She will be part of the family, and I expect all of you to respect her as such." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak out of turn. Dominic's decision was clear, and there was no room for argument. One of the advisors, a seasoned member of the inner circle, spoke up cautiously. "Sir, with all due respect, this could change the dynamics of the household." Dominic's eyes narrowed, but he didn't raise his voice. "It's time for change. I'm done living in the past, holding on to outdated ways of thinking. Jasmine has earned her place here. She saved my daughter's life. That is not something I will take lightly." He stood up, his presence commanding attention. "We will treat her with the respect she deserves, or I will find new people to work for me." His tone was final. The advisors nodded in agreement, though none of them seemed entirely comfortable with the shift in power. As they left the room, Dominic's mind raced. He had just made a decision that would reverberate throughout his empire. It wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about how he viewed himself and the people around him. Jasmine's actions had forced him to confront the truth. Love and loyalty were the true sources of power, not fear or control. Later that day, Dominic called for Jasmine to meet him in his private study. When she arrived, he motioned for her to sit across from him. She did so quietly, her eyes wary. "Jasmine," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I know I haven't been fair to you. I've treated you as nothing more than a servant, and for that, I apologize." Jasmine was taken aback by his words. unsure of how to respond. But you've shown me something that I couldn't see before, Dominic continued. You've shown me what true strength and love look like. And for that, I will always be grateful. Jasmine looked down, not quite sure what to say. She had never expected such recognition from him, especially not after all these years. From now on, Dominic said, you will not just be part of this household. You will be part of this family. You've earned it. His words hung in the air, and for the first time, Jasmine felt a shift in the power dynamics. She wasn't just someone who worked in the background anymore. She was seen, respected, and valued. As she left the study, a sense of peace washed over her. She hadn't asked for this recognition, but it felt right. She had saved Dominic's daughter, and in doing so, she had saved something much deeper. The heart of the man who had once been so blind to the power of love. Jasmine didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino sat in his office, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. It had been days since he had made the call to change how he viewed Jasmine, the woman who had quietly worked in his household for years. She was no longer just an employee. She had become something much more, a part of his family. The shift in perspective had not been easy. His empire, built on control, power, and fear, did not leave room for soft emotions. But Jasmine had cracked that foundation. She had shown him a different side of life, a side that valued love, care, and sacrifice over money and status. Dominic had never been one to question his actions, but now, for the first time, he found himself asking what it all meant. Was power truly enough to fill the void he had spent his entire life building? Was control worth it when he had lost touch with the people who mattered most? These thoughts lingered in his mind, but there was no time for self-doubt. His family needed him. His empire needed him. He couldn't afford to let emotions get in the way. Yet, as he sat at his desk, looking over the various reports on his empire's affairs, his mind kept drifting back to Jasmine. He had seen something in her that had always been missing from his life. Genuine, unconditional love. She had saved his daughter, Emma, not with wealth or resources, but with her compassion. He had witnessed her sacrifice for Emma and for the family. And in doing so, Jasmine had given him something he could never buy, a sense of true connection. It was late afternoon when Dominic finally decided he would take action. He had put it off long enough, but now it was time to honor his decision to include Jasmine in his family. She had already proven her loyalty, her strength, and her heart. It was time for him to do the same. He made his way to the living area of the mansion, where Jasmine was tending to Emma, who had just woken up from a nap. The little girl's giggle filled the room, her joy a stark contrast to the grim reality of the Mafia world Dominic lived in. Emma had been doing well since that night, when Jasmine had calmed her down and comforted her when no one else could. For that alone, Dominic owed Jasmine more than he could ever express. As he walked into the room, Jasmine looked up and smiled, a simple, quiet gesture that spoke volumes. She had no idea what he was about to say, but in that moment, Dominic could feel the weight of his decision. He had already made it, but he needed to share it with her. Jasmine, he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, I've made my decision. You are part of this family now. From this moment on, you will be treated as such. I no longer see you as just someone who works for us. You are a protector of this family, someone who saved my daughter's life. For that, you have my respect. Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise, her hands trembling slightly. She had never expected this kind of acknowledgement from him, especially after all the years she had spent in the shadows. She had always been the quiet, unseen figure in the background, but now, Dominic had elevated her to a place of importance in his life. Thank you, sir, she said softly, but her voice trailed off as she tried to process what he was saying. I've always done my best, she continued, but I never imagined. Her words faltered as she struggled to find the right way to respond. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze softening. You didn't have to imagine anything, Jasmine. You've shown me what it means to truly care for someone. That's something I've been missing for a long time. The sincerity in his words took Jasmine by surprise, and for a moment, she could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. Dominic reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter. He handed it to her, his eyes never leaving hers. This is for you, he said. A new position, with the title of head of household. You'll have more responsibility, more authority in this family than anyone else. No more hiding in the background. You deserve to be seen, Jasmine, and I will make sure of it. Jasmine took the letter in her hands, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of his words was almost too much to bear. She had always worked hard, always kept her head down, but this was a recognition she had never expected. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was something far greater. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Dominic placed a hand on her shoulder, a reassuring gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. You don't need to say anything, Jasmine. Your actions have already spoken for you. I'll make sure that from now on, you are treated with the respect you deserve. With that, Dominic turned and left the room, leaving Jasmine standing in the center, the letter in her hands. She could hardly believe what had just transpired. The life she had known for so long was slipping away, replaced by something entirely new, something filled with promise, respect, and the chance to finally be seen. As she looked down at the letter in her hands, Jasmine felt a surge of emotion. She had never asked for this. She had never sought recognition or power. All she had ever wanted was to care for those she loved. And now, it seemed, her quiet, selfless love had been enough to change everything. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine allowed herself to hope. She had always believed in love and sacrifice, but now, she realized that those things could truly change the course of a life. As she walked over to Emma, who was now playing with her dolls, she felt a warmth in her heart that she had never known before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was family. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino sat at the head of the grand dining table, his mind heavy with the events of the past week. He had made a decision that he knew would change everything, but he still wasn't sure if he was ready for the consequences. It wasn't just about Jasmine's new position in the household. It was about him, about how he had spent his life building an empire, and how in one moment, everything had shifted. Jasmine, the woman he had once seen as nothing more than a maid, had become the anchor he didn't know he needed. His daughter, Emma, had already shown signs of being happier and healthier since the night Jasmine had calmed her when no one else could. But it wasn't just Emma's well-being that Dominic was focused on now. It was Jasmine, too. She had done something no one else had ever been able to do. She had broken through the cold walls that Dominic had carefully built around his heart. He hadn't realized how isolated he had become until Jasmine showed him the power of kindness. For years, Dominic had trusted no one but himself. He had built his empire with sheer force and intelligence, but he had never known what it felt like to trust someone else, to rely on them completely. Jasmine had earned that trust, and in doing so, she had earned something far more important, his respect. Dominic knew he had to act quickly if he was going to honor the changes he had made to his family dynamic. He called for a family meeting, something he rarely did. His inner circle had always operated in the shadows, with everyone knowing their place. But now, everything was different. It was time for the people in his life to see Jasmine in a new light. As the family members gathered around the table, Dominic's gaze swept over them, his eyes cold and calculating. But there was a shift in his demeanor. They could all sense it. He wasn't the same man he had been a week ago. "I've made some changes," Dominic began, his voice firm but carrying an undercurrent of emotion. "Changes that affect all of you." His words hung in the air, and everyone looked at him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Jasmine," he continued, his eyes locking with hers, "has earned her place in this family. From now on, she will be treated with the respect and honor she deserves. No one will ever disrespect her again." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the murmurs began. Some of his associates exchanged uneasy glances. Others looked at Dominic as if he had lost his mind. But none of them dared speak out of turn. They knew better than to challenge Dominic's decisions. "She has been a loyal servant to this family, and she has done more for us than many of you ever will," Dominic said, his voice unwavering. "And for that, she will be elevated. Jasmine is now head of household. She will be making decisions regarding the care of Emma, the staff, and the operations of the household. Her word will carry as much weight as mine in these matters." His words were met with a mix of shock and hesitation, but Dominic didn't care. This wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about doing what was right. Jasmine had earned her place, and he would make sure everyone understood that. He looked around the table, his gaze hardening. "If anyone has an issue with this, you can leave. But if you stay, you will treat her as part of this family, just as you would treat me. Dominic's voice brooked no argument. The tension in the room was palpable, but one by one, each person nodded, accepting his decision. As the meeting broke up, Dominic stayed behind, watching as everyone filed out of the room. He turned to Jasmine, who had remained quietly at the back of the room, her eyes fixed on him. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. Jasmine hesitated, the weight of the new responsibility settling over her. "I never wanted power, Dominic," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I just wanted to help. But I'll do my best. For Emma. For you." Dominic nodded, his gaze softening. "I know you will." As the days passed, things began to change in the mansion. Jasmine took charge of the household with a calm authority that surprised even Dominic. She made sure Emma's needs were met, ensuring that the little girl was always surrounded by love and care. The staff respected her, and slowly, even the most stubborn members of Dominic's inner circle began to see her in a new light. But it wasn't just the staff who noticed the change, Dominic did too. He found himself relying on Jasmine more and more, not just for her help with Emma, but for her wisdom and her insight. He had always been the one in control, the one making all the decisions, but now, he found himself seeking her advice, listening to her opinions with genuine interest. One evening as they sat together in the living room, Dominic couldn't help but admire her. Jasmine had been with him for years, but it was only now that he truly saw her. She was strong, capable, and kind, everything he had never thought he needed. "Jasmine," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never expected any of this. But I'm glad it happened. You've changed everything for me." She looked at him, a small smile on her lips. "I didn't mean to change everything," she replied. "I just did what felt right." Dominic smiled, a rare, genuine smile that didn't come from power or control. It came from the heart. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't just ruling an empire. He was part of a family. And it was all because of Jasmine's love and sacrifice. Jasmine had given him something he never knew he was missing. And in return, he promised he would never take her for granted again. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino sat in the study, staring out the window at the sprawling grounds of his mansion. The weight of the past few weeks was heavy on his shoulders. His life had changed in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Jasmine, the woman who had once been nothing more than a maid in his eyes, had transformed into something far more important. She had become a cornerstone of his family, a woman whose love for his daughter Emma had not only saved her life, but had also made Dominic question everything he had built his empire on. For years, he had relied on fear, control, and power to keep people in line. But Jasmine had shown him a different way, one of compassion, loyalty, and respect. He had made her head of the household, giving her authority over the day-to-day operations of his family. It was a decision that shook the very foundation of his world, but it was a decision that felt right. Still, Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His empire was intact, his business was thriving, and Emma was healthy and happy, but there was a nagging emptiness inside him. He had never truly known love until Jasmine had entered his life, and now, he realized how much he had taken for granted. He had spent so many years building walls around his heart, convinced that power was everything. But in the presence of Jasmine's love and sacrifice, those walls had come crashing down. It was late at night when Dominic made up his mind. He had to see Jasmine. He needed to speak to her, to thank her in a way he hadn't done before. It wasn't enough to simply give her a new title or a position of power. She deserved more. She deserved to be seen as more than just a caretaker. She was the heart of his family now, and he wanted to make sure she knew that. Dominic walked through the quiet halls of the mansion, the only sound being the soft echo of his footsteps. As he approached the room where Jasmine was staying, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. When he entered, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when she saw him, her expression calm, though there was a trace of uncertainty in her eyes. "Jasmine," he said, his voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking." She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "You've done so much for me and for this family," he went on, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've given more than I could ever ask for, and it's time I gave something back." She tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "You've already done more than enough, Dominic," she replied, her voice gentle. "I never expected any of this." Dominic took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "But you deserve more. You deserve to be treated with the same respect I expect from everyone in my life. You're not just a maid anymore. You're a part of this family, and I want to make sure you know that." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I want you to stay here, not as an employee, but as someone who is truly loved and appreciated." Jasmine's eyes softened, and for the first time, Dominic saw the vulnerability in her eyes. She had always been so strong, so composed, but in that moment, he realized how much she had sacrificed for him, for Emma, and for the family. She had given everything without ever asking for anything in return. "Dominic, I don't need anything more than what I already have," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I will accept this, because I know it means something to you." Dominic smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It means everything to me, Jasmine," he said softly. "You saved my daughter, and in doing so, you saved me. I will never forget that." Jasmine squeezed his hand, and for a moment, they both just sat there in silence, the weight of their words settling between them. They didn't need anything more than this simple exchange, this moment of mutual understanding. They were family now, bound not by blood, but by something much stronger, love. The next few days passed in a blur. Jasmine took on her new role with ease, seamlessly stepping into her place as head of the household. Dominic found himself relying on her more and more, not just for her help with Emma, but for her guidance. She had a wisdom that he had never recognized before, a wisdom that came from the heart. And with each passing day, Dominic realized just how much he needed her, how much he had always needed someone like her in his life. Jasmine had changed him, not with grand gestures or bold actions, but with the quiet strength of her love. It was a love that had healed his family, and it was a love that had finally healed him. As the days went by, Dominic found himself more at peace with the decisions he had made. He no longer felt the need to control every aspect of his life. Instead, he embraced the love and loyalty that surrounded him. He had everything he needed right here, in his family. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly content. Jasmine had given him the greatest gift of all, the gift of unconditional love, and he would never take that for granted again. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino had never been one to let his emotions guide his decisions. For years, he had ruled his empire with calculated precision, using fear and power to control those around him. But now, as he sat in his office late at night, looking over the papers in front of him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't the success of his business, the wealth he had amassed, or the fear he commanded. It was something deeper, something he had never truly understood until Jasmine had entered his life. She had changed everything. She had given him something that no amount of money or power could ever provide: unconditional love. The love she had shown his daughter, Emma, had opened Dominic's eyes to a world he had long ignored. For the first time, he was beginning to see what it meant to be part of a family, not just a ruler of an empire. And that realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Dominic had always been in control, but with Jasmine in his life, he found himself questioning his choices. He couldn't help but wonder if he had been too focused on his business, too consumed with power, to see what was truly important. The love and sacrifice Jasmine had shown him, his daughter, and their family had softened the walls around his heart. It was something he never expected, and now, he was struggling to navigate the emotions that had been buried for so long. But one thing was clear: he couldn't go back to the way things were. Jasmine had changed him, and now he had to figure out what that meant for his future. As Dominic leaned back in his chair, deep in thought, he heard a soft knock on the door. He looked up to see Jasmine standing in the doorway, her expression calm, yet filled with an unspoken understanding. "You've been quiet tonight," she said softly. "I thought I would check on you." Dominic smiled faintly, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I've just been thinking," he said, his voice a little more vulnerable than usual. "About everything." Jasmine stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, walking over to where he sat. "You don't have to do it all on your own, Dominic," she said gently, sitting down next to him. "You don't have to carry the weight of the world." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so many years convinced that he had to handle everything by himself, that vulnerability was a weakness. But Jasmine's presence, her steady support, made him realize that there was strength in sharing the burden. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to lean on someone else. "I know," he said quietly. "I've always thought I had to do everything alone. But you've shown me something different." Jasmine smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "I'm not going anywhere," she said simply. "You're not alone anymore." Dominic's heart swelled with emotion, and for a moment, he didn't know how to express everything he was feeling. But as he looked at Jasmine, he knew that he didn't need to say anything. She understood him in a way no one else ever had. Together, they had built something stronger than his empire, a family. Dominic reached out and took her hand in his, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "You've given me more than I could ever give back." Jasmine's grip tightened around his hand, and she looked at him with a mixture of affection and resolve. "You've already given me everything I need," she replied. "Your trust, your respect. That's enough." Dominic let out a breath, feeling a weight lift off his chest. For so long, he had been consumed by his need for control, but now, with Jasmine by his side, he could let go of that. He could let love and loyalty guide him, instead of power and fear. As they sat together in silence, the room around them felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The empire Dominic had built was still standing, but now, it felt less important than the people who mattered most. He had always prided himself on being a powerful man, but now, he realized that true power came from the connections you made, the love you gave, and the sacrifices you were willing to make for the people you cared about. Jasmine had shown him that, and now, as he sat next to her, he knew that he had everything he needed. It wasn't just about ruling over others. It was about building something real, something lasting. And that was something Dominic had never known until now. He wasn't just a mafia boss anymore. He was a man with a family. And that was the greatest power of all. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino stood at the window of his private study, his gaze lost in the city lights below. He had made many decisions in his life, decisions that had built his empire, decisions that had shaped him into the man he was today. But none of those decisions had felt as significant as the ones he had made in the past few weeks. The changes in his household, the changes in his heart. He had never imagined how quickly things would shift. Jasmine, the woman who had once been a mere servant in his eyes, had become an irreplaceable part of his life. She had given him a gift he had never asked for, love, loyalty, and care for his daughter, Emma. But it was more than that. She had given him the chance to see beyond his wealth and power, to understand what truly mattered. For the first time, he had opened his heart, and Jasmine had helped him navigate a path he never thought he would take. As he turned from the window, he looked at the photographs of his family, his late wife, his daughter, and now, Jasmine, who had taken on the role of guiding the household with a quiet but powerful presence. The decision to give her authority had been difficult, but it had been necessary. He could no longer hide behind the walls he had built. He needed to trust, to let someone in, and Jasmine had earned that trust. It had not been easy for Dominic to admit that he had been wrong about many things. He had spent so much time focusing on his empire that he had neglected the things that truly made him human. The people who loved him, the people he loved. His life had always been about control, but Jasmine had shown him that true strength didn't lie in domination. It lay in compassion, in understanding, and in the ability to protect those you cared about. He walked across the room to his desk and sat down, his mind racing with the thoughts of the future. There was still much to be done. His empire was powerful, but it had its enemies, and those enemies would not go down without a fight. The world he lived in was unforgiving, and for a man like him, it was easy to feel like everything was always on the verge of crumbling. But now, as he sat in his office, he knew one thing for certain. His family would never crumble. Not while he had Jasmine by his side. The door to his study creaked open, and he looked up to see Jasmine standing in the doorway, a quiet but confident presence. "You look deep in thought," she said, her voice soft but strong. Dominic nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Just thinking about everything that's changed." Jasmine stepped into the room and sat across from him, her eyes meeting his. "Change can be difficult," she said, "but it can also be a good thing. You've made the right choice." Dominic's smile faded slightly, his expression turning more serious. I hope so. I've spent my life building an empire based on control and power, but I realize now that I've neglected the most important thing. Jasmine's brow furrowed, her curiosity piqued. And what's that? She asked. Love, Dominic said quietly. Love, loyalty, trust. These are the things that truly matter. Not the money, not the power. I was blind to that before, but you've shown me what it really means to care for someone. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that Dominic had a good heart, buried beneath the layers of his tough exterior. But hearing him say it out loud, acknowledging the truth, filled her with a warmth she hadn't expected. I just did what felt right, she said, her voice gentle. Dominic shook his head. You did more than that. You gave me a second chance. You made me see what I had been missing. And for that, I will be forever grateful. Jasmine smiled softly, a quiet understanding passing between them. They had both been through so much, but in the end, they had found something deeper than just survival. They had found each other. The world outside the mansion was full of danger and uncertainty, but in that moment, Dominic knew that as long as Jasmine was by his side, he could face anything. He reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to face it with you, he said. Jasmine squeezed his hand, her voice steady and filled with resolve. We'll face it together. For the first time in a long while, Dominic felt a sense of peace. He had made his empire from the ground up, but now, he realized, it was his family that was his true legacy. With Jasmine by his side, he was no longer just the Mafia boss. He was a man with a purpose, with a family to protect, and a love to fight for. And in that moment, as they sat together, Dominic understood what it meant to truly have everything. It wasn't about the empire, the power, or the control. It was about the people you loved, the ones you would protect with everything you had. And Jasmine had shown him that, in a way no one else ever could. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino sat at his desk, his fingers drumming lightly on the surface as he watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city. It had been a few weeks since the meeting where he had officially made Jasmine the head of the household, and since then, everything had changed. His family life had transformed, and for the first time in his life, Dominic found himself questioning the very foundation of his empire. He had built his world on the principles of power and control, but Jasmine had shown him the power of love, trust, and loyalty. He couldn't deny that she had changed him in ways he never expected. She had brought warmth and humanity into his life, something he had long suppressed. As he stared out the window, Dominic realized that he wasn't just protecting his empire anymore. He was protecting something far more precious, his family. Jasmine had become an irreplaceable part of that family, and he knew now that he would do anything to protect her and Emma. But even as he basked in the newfound peace of his personal life, the reality of his world remained ever present. His enemies were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. It wasn't enough to simply change the dynamics of his household. He had to ensure that his empire remained secure, that no one could threaten the safety of his family. It was with this in mind that Dominic made the decision to meet with his closest associates. His trusted men, those who had worked with him for years, had to understand that things were changing. The decision to protect Jasmine wasn't just a personal one, it was strategic. His family was his greatest asset now, and if anyone had a problem with that, they would face the consequences. That evening, as the men gathered in the dimly lit conference room, Dominic took his usual seat at the head of the table, his demeanor calm, yet commanding. The men filed in one by one there, expressions unreadable, but Dominic knew they could sense the change in him. He wasn't the same man they had worked for all these years. Gentlemen, he began, his voice low but firm, things are changing. Jasmine is now part of this family, and from this point forward, she will have a say in every decision that concerns this household. The room fell silent. Dominic's words hung in the air, and he could see the confusion and uncertainty in their eyes. He had always been a man of few words, but now, he was making it clear that his family would come first. One of the men, a seasoned enforcer named Luca, spoke up cautiously. Boss, we've always respected you. But this, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. This isn't like you. You've never let anyone into your inner circle before. Dominic's gaze hardened, but his tone remained measured. I've never had anyone worth trusting before. Jasmine has earned that trust. She has proven herself, not just as a caretaker for my daughter, but as a woman of strength and integrity. You will respect her position in this family, just as you respect mine." The men exchanged uncertain glances, but no one dared to challenge him. They knew better than that. Dominic had built his empire with fear, but now he was wielding something far more powerful, his own vulnerability. He was no longer just a boss. He was a man who loved, who cared, and who would protect what was his at all costs. "We've been through a lot together," Dominic continued, his voice softening. "And I'm not asking you to accept this change overnight. But I am telling you that this is the way it's going to be. If anyone has a problem with it, you know what happens." The tension in the room was palpable, but one by one, the men nodded in understanding. They knew Dominic's word was law, and they would follow it, whether they liked it or not. As the meeting concluded, Dominic couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He had made his stance clear, and now there would be no turning back. Jasmine was part of his family, and that meant she was protected, no matter what. Later that night, as Dominic and Jasmine sat together in the living room, a quiet calm settled over them. Emma was asleep upstairs, her small, peaceful breaths a reminder of why they had made these changes in the first place. Jasmine looked at Dominic, her eyes searching his face. "You did well today," she said softly, her voice filled with admiration. Dominic met her gaze, his expression softening. "I did what needed to be done," he replied. "But more importantly, I did it for you and for Emma. I won't let anything happen to my family." Jasmine smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had always known that Dominic was a man of power, but she had never expected to see this side of him, the side that cared, that loved, that was willing to fight for those he held dear. For the first time, she felt truly seen, truly appreciated. Dominic reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I don't know what I would do without you," he whispered. "You've changed everything for me, and I won't take that for granted." Jasmine squeezed his hand, her heart full. "You've always had it in you, Dominic," she said softly. "You just needed someone to show you." As they sat together in silence, the weight of their shared understanding hung in the air. Dominic had finally found what he had been searching for, not just power, but love and loyalty. And with Jasmine by his side, he knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges the future held. The Mafia world may have been unforgiving, but for Dominic, the love of his family was the greatest protection of all. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino stood at the edge of the balcony, overlooking the city skyline as the evening air began to cool. The lights below flickered, a constant reminder of the empire he had built and the power he wielded. Yet, for all the success he had achieved, for all the control he had over his criminal empire, there was a gnawing feeling inside him, a feeling he couldn't ignore anymore. He had spent so much of his life trying to control everything around him, thinking that power was all that mattered. But recently, that belief had been shaken to its core. Jasmine had done that, opened his eyes to a new world where love, loyalty, and family were just as important as anything he had ever built. It had started with Emma, his daughter, the night Jasmine had taken care of her, nursing her back from the brink of illness with nothing but her love and nurturing spirit. Dominic had felt something he had never felt before, a deep sense of gratitude. And that gratitude had turned into something more. He had let down his guard, let someone in. It had been the most difficult thing for him to do, but Jasmine had made it impossible for him to remain the same man. She had become his rock, his anchor. Now, as he watched the night unfold before him, he realized just how much his life had changed. His family was no longer just a part of his world, they were his world, and he would do anything to protect them. "Dominic." The sound of Jasmine's voice brought him back to reality. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her expression calm, but filled with concern. "You've been out here for a while," she said softly, stepping toward him. He smiled faintly, feeling a rush of warmth at the sight of her. "Just thinking," he replied. "About everything." Jasmine crossed the room and joined him on the balcony. For a moment, they stood together in silence, looking out at the city below. "You've been quieter than usual," she observed, her voice gentle. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Dominic let out a deep breath, his gaze still fixed on the lights below. "I've been thinking about what comes next. We've made changes, big ones, but there's still so much to be done. I can't help but wonder if I'm doing enough to keep this family safe." Jasmine's eyes softened, and she reached out to place a hand on his arm. You've already done more than enough, she said quietly. You've protected us by simply being here, by allowing us to be part of your life. I can't imagine what it must have been like for you to open up to someone like that. Dominic looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of appreciation and uncertainty. It's hard to explain. I've spent my whole life thinking that I needed to be in control, that power was everything. But now, I see that it's not. It's about protecting the people you love, the people who matter. He paused, letting the words sink in. And I'm afraid that I've been so focused on the empire that I've neglected the most important thing, my family. Jasmine squeezed his arm, her voice soothing. You're here now, Dominic. That's what matters. You're not alone anymore. We're all in this together. Her words, simple yet powerful, settled over him like a blanket of warmth. He had been so terrified of losing control, so obsessed with keeping everything in line, that he had almost forgotten what it meant to truly live. To love, to care, to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, he had found strength he hadn't known existed. The silence between them stretched, comfortable, and filled with understanding. Finally, Dominic spoke again, his voice quieter this time. I don't know what the future holds. The world we live in is unpredictable, and I have enemies who won't stop until they get what they want. I've made a lot of enemies over the years, and I won't let them destroy what we've built. Jasmine's gaze never wavered. And you won't have to, she said firmly. We'll face it together. You've shown me what it means to trust, to protect, and to love. And I'm here, right beside you. Always. Dominic looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. He had never imagined that he would find someone who would stand by him like this, someone who understood the depths of his struggle and was willing to fight beside him. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. Jasmine smiled, her eyes soft and filled with love. You don't have to thank me, she said. I'm here because I want to be. You've given me more than I could ever ask for. And I'll never leave. Dominic nodded, a sense of calm settling over him. For the first time, he felt like he had truly found something worth protecting, something beyond his empire. It was his family, his love for Jasmine and Emma. That was now his greatest strength. And no matter what came next, he would face it with them by his side. As they stood together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below, Dominic realized that the life he had always known was no longer enough. He wanted more. He wanted a future where his family was safe, where they could thrive in the love and loyalty they had built. And with Jasmine by his side, he knew they would face whatever came their way, together. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino stood in his office, his gaze fixed on the papers. Before him, the weight of the decisions he had made over the past few weeks pressed on his mind. But there was something even more pressing now. Jasmine, the woman he had once seen as nothing more than a servant, was now his equal in many ways. She had been a constant source of support for him, not only for his daughter Emma, but for him as well. The changes in his household had been significant, but there was still one lingering issue that Dominic couldn't ignore. His enemies. The very empire he had built, the one Jasmine had helped him rediscover, was under constant threat. And it wasn't just about protecting the empire anymore. It was about protecting his family. For the first time in his life, Dominic realized that his power wasn't just tied to the businesses he ran or the men who followed his orders. His real power now lay in the people he loved and the bonds he had formed with them. He knew he had to take steps to safeguard those bonds. Jasmine had already proven her loyalty, her strength, and her ability to protect Emma. But now, he needed to ensure that no one could tear that apart. Dominic's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock on the door. He looked up to see Jasmine standing there, her expression calm but serious. You've been quiet today, she said, stepping into the room. I know something's on your mind. Dominic gestured for her to sit, his face softening. I've been thinking about the future, he said, his voice low. The future of this family and the threats we face. Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly, her concern evident. What do you mean? She asked. Dominic sighed, leaning back in his chair. There are people who want to see everything I've built crumble. I've made enemies over the years, enemies who won't stop until they get what they want. And it's not just about my empire anymore. It's about you and Emma, too. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had known the dangers of Dominic's world, but hearing him acknowledge the risks was different. She had always done her best to keep Emma safe, but now Dominic was talking about the bigger picture. about protecting the ones he loved. What can we do? She asked, her voice steady. Dominic looked at her, his eyes hardening with determination. We need to be prepared. I've trusted my men for years, but I've come to realize that we can't always rely on them to protect us. We need to take control of our own safety. I want you and Emma to be safe, and I want to make sure we're ready for anything. Jasmine nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of his words. So, what's the plan? She asked. Dominic leaned forward, his expression serious. I'm going to make sure our home is secure. I've already started working with some trusted contacts to fortify the mansion, but I need you to be involved. We need to know what we're up against, and I want you to be prepared for anything that might come our way. Jasmine was quiet for a moment, processing what he had said. She had never thought of herself as part of Dominic's world in that way. She had always been a caretaker, someone who kept things running smoothly in the background. But now, Dominic was asking her to be more. He was asking her to step into the role of protector, just as he had. I'm with you, she said finally, her voice resolute. I'll do whatever it takes to keep Emma safe. And to keep you safe. Dominic's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand in his. I know you will, he said quietly. And that's why I trust you. We're in this together, Jasmine. We always have been. Jasmine squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of his words. She had never imagined that her life would take such a turn, but now, she couldn't imagine it any other way. She had found a purpose in Dominic's world, a purpose she hadn't expected but was willing to embrace. For Emma, for Dominic, and for herself. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but with the strength they had built together, Jasmine knew they could face anything. That night, as they sat together in the quiet of the mansion, Dominic couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led them to this point. He had never imagined that his life would turn out like this, filled with love, vulnerability, and a sense of family he had never known. Jasmine had changed everything for him, and now, he was willing to do whatever it took to protect that change. As he looked over at her, he knew that they were no longer just allies in the world of crime and power. They were a family, and he would defend that family with every ounce of his being. We'll get through this, Dominic said, his voice low but full of certainty. Jasmine nodded, her heart steady with the trust she had in him and in herself. Together, they would face whatever dangers came their way. Together, they would fight for their family. Mafia boss Dominic Valentino sat in the study, his fingers lightly tapping against the edge of the desk. His mind raced as he processed everything that had happened in the past few weeks. The changes in his family, his newfound understanding of love, loyalty, and trust, they were all interconnected. But with every step forward, a new danger loomed just behind him. The world he had built was still full of enemies, rivals who would do anything to tear him down, to destroy everything he had worked for. And now that Jasmine and Emma were at the center of his world, Dominic knew that protecting them would require more than just power. It would require him to do something he had never done before, trust others completely. As he sat there, thinking about how to secure the safety of his family, his thoughts turned to his old circle of trusted associates. Men he had relied on for years, men who had helped him build the empire that made him untouchable. But over time, Dominic had grown more isolated. He had distanced himself from his allies, focusing only on his business. Now, as he considered the growing threats against his family, he realized that he needed to bring in new blood. He couldn't fight this war alone. There were whispers in the underworld of betrayal, alliances shifting in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before the storm reached his doorstep. Dominic knew he had to act fast. He needed to build a team, one that would protect not just his empire, but his family. But trust would not come easy. He had been burned before, and his enemies had been too close for comfort. The stakes were higher now. With Jasmine by his side, his entire world had shifted. She wasn't just his lover. She was the protector of his heart, the woman who had brought his family together. And Emma, she had become his reason to fight, to ensure that no one could ever take her from him. The decision was made. Dominic reached for his phone and dialed the number of his old friend and confidant, Marco. Marco had been by his side for years, through thick and thin. If there was anyone he could trust in this world, it was Marco. The phone rang twice before Marco picked up. Boss. Marco's voice came through, low and steady. I need to talk to you, Dominic said, his voice tinged with urgency. I've got a plan, and I need you to help me put it into motion. Marco paused for a moment, sensing the seriousness in Dominic's tone. "What's going on?" he asked. "It's time," Dominic said, leaning back in his chair. "We need to bring in new people. People who can be trusted with the safety of my family. I can't fight this battle alone, Marco. Too many things have changed." Marco's voice was calm, but resolute. "I'm with you, boss. Always. What do you need me to do?" Dominic took a deep breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. "I'll send you the details. Meet me at the usual spot tomorrow morning. We're going to start building a team." As he hung up the phone, Dominic knew that the road ahead would not be easy. His enemies were everywhere, and the world he had once controlled was slipping through his fingers. But with Jasmine and Emma by his side, and with Marco's loyalty, he would fight with everything he had to protect them. The following day, Dominic met with Marco in a quiet, secluded spot. Marco arrived on time, his eyes sharp as ever, taking in the surroundings with a careful gaze. Dominic briefed him on the plan, how they would recruit new members, individuals who could be trusted not just with their lives, but with the future of his family. "I've already got a few names in mind," Marco said, looking over the list Dominic had prepared. "We'll need to move quickly. There are people watching you, boss." Dominic nodded. He had known this would be a delicate process. The people he would bring in had to be discreet, loyal, and willing to do whatever it took to protect those he cared about. "We'll handle it," Dominic said, his voice firm. "But we can't waste time. I want to be ready for anything." As they talked strategy, Dominic's mind kept drifting back to Jasmine and Emma. They were his anchor now, and every decision he made was for them. The life he had built was no longer just about wealth or power. It was about keeping them safe, about building something real and lasting. When the meeting was over, Dominic felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The pieces were falling into place. He had trusted his gut before, and now, more than ever, he had to trust it again. With Marco at his side, and with the new team he would assemble, he was ready to face whatever came next. The world was changing around him, but he would make sure that Jasmine, Emma, and his empire would stand strong, no matter what. As he returned to the mansion, Dominic knew that his fight was just beginning. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel alone. Jasmine's presence in his life had given him a strength he had never known, and with her by his side, he was prepared for anything. He had built his empire, but now, he was building a family, one that would survive whatever storms the future held. Dominic Valentino stood at the edge of the mansion's garden, his eyes scanning the horizon, the weight of the past and the future resting heavily on his shoulders. It had been months since he had made the decision to change everything, to allow love, vulnerability, and family into his life. And now, as he looked out over the estate he had worked so hard to build, he realized that this was the beginning of something entirely new. He had spent so many years alone, trusting no one, thinking that control and power were the only things that mattered. But now, with Jasmine and Emma by his side, he understood that true strength came from the connections you made with the people you loved. He had rebuilt his empire with that truth in mind, and it had given him a sense of purpose he had never known before. Jasmine had been the catalyst for this change, the one who had shown him what it meant to love, to trust, and to protect those you cared about. She had saved his daughter, had saved him, and in the process, had brought them all together as a family. The empire he had, once ruled with an iron fist, was now just a part of his life, not the entirety of it. His true power lay in the bonds he had forged with Jasmine and Emma, and that was a power that no one could take away. But as he stood there, he knew that danger was never far away. His enemies were always lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Dominic had been aware of the risks from the start, but now, more than ever, he knew what he had to protect. The world outside the mansion was filled with dangers, rivals, betrayal, and the constant threat of violence. But Dominic wasn't the man he had been when he started. He had a family now, and that made him stronger. Jasmine had reminded him of that. As Dominic turned to go inside, he felt a sudden, intense wave of love for the life he had now. He had everything he had ever wanted, not in the form of power or wealth, but in the form of love, trust, and family. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see Jasmine, her eyes full of understanding. She had always known what was on his mind, what he needed, even before he did. "You're deep in thought," she said softly, a gentle smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Always," Dominic replied, his voice softer than usual. Just thinking about everything we've built. Jasmine walked up beside him, her hand finding his, a quiet reassurance that he wasn't alone in this. We've built a lot, she said, her voice calm, but filled with determination. And we'll keep building it together. Dominic's gaze softened as he looked down at her, feeling the depth of their bond. He had never thought he would find someone who could understand him, someone who could stand by him through the chaos of his world. But Jasmine had been there, steady and strong, every step of the way. You've changed everything for me, Dominic said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought I needed anything more than power. But now I see what matters. Jasmine squeezed his hand, her eyes full of warmth. You've always had it in you, she said gently. You just needed someone to remind you. Dominic smiled, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. He had never known such peace, such certainty. For the first time in his life, he felt whole, not because of the empire he had built, but because of the family he had found. The future was still uncertain. There would always be risks, always be enemies, but Dominic was no longer afraid. He had something worth fighting for, something more valuable than any empire or fortune. He had love, loyalty, and the unwavering bond of family. And that was enough to face whatever came their way. As they stood together in the garden, Dominic realized that this was just the beginning. Their journey was far from over, but they would face it as a family, together. Nothing, not even the most dangerous enemies, could tear them apart. For the first time in years, Dominic felt at peace, knowing that his true power lay in the love he had for his family and the love they had for him. Jasmine leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, they both stood in silence, feeling the weight of everything they had overcome. The world outside was still dark, but inside their home, there was light. And together, they would face whatever challenges the future held, side by side. In this captivating story of transformation, Dominic Valentino, a powerful mafia boss, finds his life turned upside down by the love and loyalty of a woman who started as a mere maid in his household. This tale of romance and redemption delves deep into the emotional journey of a man who, after years of ruling his empire with control and fear, opens his heart to the warmth of love. Through unexpected acts of care and sacrifice, Jasmine, his once overlooked maid, changes not only his daughter Emma's life, but also the very foundation of Dominic's world. As their bond deepens, Dominic must navigate the dangerous underworld of his empire, balancing love with the ever-present threat of betrayal. These romance stories remind us that true strength comes not from power, but from the connections we build with others. In the face of looming threats and challenges, the love between Dominic and Jasmine proves that even the toughest hearts can be softened by genuine care. With Jasmine by his side, Dominic learns the true meaning of family, trust, and loyalty as their love story unfolds amidst the dangers of mafia life. This series of romance stories will take you on an emotional journey, where love is the ultimate force that changes everything. Join Dominic and Jasmine in this unforgettable tale of love, strength, and the power of family, as they discover that sometimes the most unexpected people can become the ones you trust the most. Dive into these romance stories to explore how love can truly conquer all.